Okay, great, thank you. So there are clearly a lot of emerging and converging themes that are coming across a lot of what you guys said. And one of the big ones we know is around data ownership and privacy. Each of you has in one way or another spoken to that. So we all know it's an issue. We know people don't like to share their field data. People don't like to share their products sometimes. And often they're for very, very legitimate privacy reasons, and for other reasons there's perceptions of value that could be lost if they're able to open, or if they open up those data for use. So I'd like to kind of focus on some of the solutions to this. The questions are, what ideas, models, or actions are you implementing to ease privacy concerns? And what are examples of successful business cases around data sharing?
So one big response that I have to all of this amazing work is I bet a lot of you are thinking, gosh, these guys are all doing the same thing. There's probably lots of competition, and the reality is it's like almost nothing is happening. Agriculture is a huge industry. 300, 400 million farmers out there. Almost none of them are actually using tools. None of them. Even in the most crowded markets, they're practically empty, right? So there's a huge amount more that we need to do. Remote sensing is hardly ever used. I go and talk with industry and they're like, I don't get it. What is this stuff? I mean, literally, it is incredibly hard to get people to use data. And I think the Manobi experience is a really relevant one. A lot of this stuff is about management. So how do we get people to share their data? And the reality is that most people are not using their data at all. Nobody is using it for anything. It's just they gather it up and they stick it in a file and it's just wasted. So one of the things we need to do is to really be clear about bringing value and about engaging in a way which will bring value not only to their organization, to yours, and to clearly explain the business model. 4 years I've been working with 6th grade and I still am struggling to explain the business model in a way that everybody will benefit. So I guess, I think we all need to look at who we know and go and say, share what you have, because it'll bring gigantic value to everyone who participates, right? So,
Thank you, Molly. Feel free to respond or add on. We're going to be on this topic for a moment.
Okay, I'll add on my perspective in looking at this through maybe from the grower's perspective. The growers are very concerned about sharing their information because in the past it's maybe been used against them in some way or not. So there's some emerging new business models where actually growers are actually banding together to share their data so they as a unit can understand the outcomes. And I think that's where we need to, as Molly said, we need to build that value proposition for growers to share the data, whether it's through their own network or through public processes themselves, markets and other activities. The other side is there's actually a lot of USDA data, for example, that's really valuable. And I think there's a moving forward with the new Farm Bill to think about how to create a data warehouse that preserves the privacy of the data, but actually can be used in aggregate to ask some big questions. So the Forest Service has been very successful in doing that with the FIA data, and I think USDA is beginning to look at ways to sort of mirror that model to protect the privacy, but take advantage of the value of the data in aggregate.
Just to add, I think, Molly, I wholeheartedly agree in terms of kind of the comment on business models, and I think we also need to take that a step further and talk about sustainable business models, right? And in terms of the spectrum that exists, right? And I think a lot of times the community will look at, particularly commercial data providers, and ask, where's your data philanthropy, right? And I think there's a time and a place for data philanthropy to really spur innovation and to spur data sharing. But I think there's much more room for creative business models, and particularly I'd say that's how we as Maxar have approached the sustainable development goals in terms of it's not purely commercial for us, it's not purely pro bono corporate social responsibility, and the rationale there is, and it's very intentional, is that our theory of change is we want to continue to invest in these areas, and we also want to break down the silos so that we're not just talking about food security unto itself, that we can talk about food security and also engage diverse stakeholders who are thinking about water security, who are thinking about national security, who are thinking about human security, et cetera, et cetera. And I think thinking through the business models and understanding where yes, Sylvain, not to pick on you, but where the win-win-wins are, absolutely. But every time I hear that, I want to know who's winning more. Because inevitably there's going to be somebody who's capturing more of that value. But I think when we can really scrutinize and ask ourselves those questions, I think that's where we're going to unlock much more in terms of data sharing. And it gets into a lot of nitty-gritty around data licensing and making sure that you have the right champion on the other side of the table to really get into that conversation with you. But I think we're there more and more.
Okay, so I'm gonna share a different feeling and maybe controversial. Concerning data access, I think we talk about the USDA or the European Union. Agriculture is a massively subsidized business. So I think if there is a political move of saying now that your data are going to be public, the next day we're going to think everything is going to be public. And I think I was talking actually to someone from the European Commission, and now there is a move in the European Union to make, for example, a field scale layer public for all countries in the European Union on condition that it's a condition to receive subsidies from the European Union. So this is for large scale. Data privacy, I mean, we live in a world where people share pictures of their kids on Facebook every day. So again, I mean, saying this field is corn or this field is wheat, I don't think it's a very big deal for farmers at the end. And we, my experience of the little projects I've run is that at the beginning they're a bit reluctant to share their data, but I think it's because they are reluctant of engaging with the partners. They take this a bit as an excuse not to share data. But at the end, when the confidence is built, if you find a way to anonymize the data, of course, data can be used against them sometime, and we need to avoid that. But if you manage to present your data in a way that you cannot identify who it belongs to, honestly, now we're running experimental pilots in France and in Italy. And at the beginning, it was always, where is your data stored? Oh, it's stored in the United States. I don't want to share the data. What are you going to do with it? But at the end, when they saw the value of working together, it's funny, we have not answered these questions, but these questions don't come anymore. So now it's a bit more fluid. So I think to join you, I think if you have the right value proposition, data comes.
Yeah, I fully echo all the previous panelists' opinion, especially if the business model, I think for farmers, for public, private sector, if they will understand there's a clear value proposition in the other way business model. So if for farmers show that they're gonna get something, and if this is sustainable, then there's no reason they don't share, and have to make that very clear and how to better communicate that is very important. How you especially in the early stage, how to build that trust is very, very critical. And I believe all the business, if you want to, all the business, all farmers, farmers gonna continue, business wanna continue. So we all think about long-term things. So thinking about a sustainable business model really make a lot of sense.
If I can just interject and add another layer to this question, I think privacy and ownership and intellectual property are all really important questions that underpin a lot of the sort of the enablers and also historically the barriers to partnership. You're starting to talk about, so we've heard some of the things that really make these relationships work: trust, mutuality, common definitions and metrics for success, defined at the outset, clear expectations, clear roles, all of these things. And so thinking about, not just the data privacy and the data sharing issue, but broadening it a bit, so what are some of these other enabling things for facilitating partnerships, removing barriers to partnership and empowering sort of success to flourish across all people involved? So what are some models for successful partnership that you've learned, and some examples that you can give where you've been engaged in that can kind of elucidate this by telling?
So this ties to the first question and this one, but the only word that was kind of ringing through my head as everyone was speaking was intention, which is a lot of times intentions are not stated clear enough, early enough for trust to be built. So I think having clarity of intention, so that provides that level of trust that one needs to have. But sometimes that's also not enough, right? And part of what we need to acknowledge when it comes to global food and ag is that it's been a system that's really been built on a lot of mistrust. And it's been a system that's built on a lot of information control, essentially meaning that certain players had a lot more power over others as a result of information. So information asymmetry has been the name of the game for a very, very long time. And so learning to trust that that's going to change is a very big part of everybody kind of having the right intentions, sharing the right intentions, and then coming to the table together. A very successful example of this happened in the energy markets. When markets actually just used to trade, so my background before I started Grow was I used to trade oil and gas. And the way that we did it was on AOL and Yahoo screens and over the phone. And this is when every other market was trading on just highly liquid exchanges and nothing was electronic. Everything was like about controlling information. 3 competitors got around the table and actually funded the creation of what's now known as ICE, the Intercontinental Exchange. Probably one of the greatest success stories because Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and BP, I was at Morgan Stanley at the time, basically making a decision to say we can work together to solve this problem, and in the end, making the markets more liquid, more deep, will benefit everybody. It will have to force a change in the business model we've all been used to, but if we can come across together to do that, I think what needs to happen for farmers to start trusting industry and for the public to start starting to trust industry is that private players like companies like ourselves have to see intention through, have to do it over and over again, and frankly just have to do the hard work to build trust. So,
Excellent, thank you.
I guess there are 3 examples for me that come to mind as successful public-private partnerships that have really been monumentally important in my career. And it picks up on this important theme of pre-competitive consortium. One of the really important and powerful things that the public sector can do is we can convene multi-sector groups in new, since I work with risk, we think about it in new risk space. And so together in that pre-competitive consortium, we can colonize new business opportunities where the risk of doing that is distributed. That tactic was used starting in 1980, where I came from at Cornell in the Department of Plant Breeding. A consortium of seed companies was put together, and that has gone on to be a huge backbone for that program, and Wisconsin federated with Cornell in this area. It's a big consortium for vegetable breeding, and there's not a lot of money. It's a membership model, but the information that's exchanged both ways is incredibly valuable. And through that, in that forum, as we began to develop varieties that had substantial commercial value, it was in dialogue, negotiated with them, that we set the terms of those, of the royalties, etc. So it's the first time I've seen companies brag about paying royalties in catalog. We pay Cornell University for that great variety. It's just been a really tremendously positive experience. The second thing that comes to mind is something that I'm going to mention another side of government. Actually, the second thing I'll mention is a company called Repositrack. Repositrack is a really interesting operation. It was started some years ago, focused on supermarket inventory control. Much of the supermarket is sold on consignment. And so it was a very sort of low-cost way that this company offers a very low-cost subscription service for suppliers. That was useful before, but it became really essential with the enactment of the Food Safety Modernization Act. Repositrack has a very nifty scheme where it doesn't take any data. It simply is granted the opportunity to read many suppliers' data and then fill that out. The last thing I'm just going to say really quickly is that our work is incredibly important. We are dealing with issues that affect every significant part of both governments and the private sector. Therefore, where we run into places where privacy can be a big issue is that the classified community also cares about many of these issues, especially when things get serious. And navigating that interface between the classified and unclassified boundary is something I think this consortium will continue to do. But it's an important thing to keep in mind.
Thank you. We're getting very, very close, and in fact we're over time, but I really would like to invite both Sibiry and Gerald to give some remarks before we wrap up. So hang tight for lunch, please.
Thank you. So I'll give a few inputs on both the data and the other partnership issues. The first thing that I would like to comment on is this focus on data sharing is, to me, reminiscent of a very self-centered approach that is typical to the remote sensing community. Which data are we talking about? Is it about farm-level data that you use to calibrate and validate your models? To me, it's a question that needs to be looked at in a different way. From the time you start sharing value, the issue of sharing data becomes a much lower issue. So one of the things that we've been working on is indeed developing the capacity to actually share the value of the information products that we work on. Three approaches, we've been using three approaches to deal with the issue of data sharing. One of them is this concept again of digital agriculture. It's not until you have people who are physically present on the ground that people can relate to, who have been typically trained in the local community or in a local district, and who are already benefiting from a deep knowledge and trust with the locals, that you can explain the use that can be made of that data in creating value. The second is that we don't spend enough time generally in creating feedback loops that inform the developers of solutions, whatever they are, about the robustness and validity and viability of those options. And a third aspect that relates to data is that we like to position ourselves as a data custodian that actually protects the issues of the private data, and this can be done in several ways. Of course, anonymization is obvious, but also sampling. So we're working with research partners in the academia, and when they see the hundreds and hundreds of variables that we collect at a farm level, they want to get it all. And we ask them, but what do you actually need that data? And most of the time, if you dig deep and try to understand what kind of data they need, at what level of sampling on a per square kilometer basis, they will need very little to actually calibrate their models correctly. And you won't need to share everything that you collect. A second point I'd like to make about the barriers to public-private partnerships and the development of these for ag assessment. Again, I would like to criticize ag assessment as a very self-centered vision. It's more about ag growth or development, in our opinion. The first is that we need to stop thinking of EO as a solution, but more as a level. If you put too much emphasis on a product that you are not actually sure has value for a particular user, you're liable to exposing yourself and actually making yourself irrelevant or untrustworthy as a partner. An example I give often is the issue of yield forecasting. There is no portability of yield forecasting from a district scale to a parcel scale because of issues of management and because yield is really an integrator of a multiplicity of little stresses. So we see much more value, and I gave this example yesterday, in very simple remote sensing primitives of products like detecting field plowing events. If you detect a field plowing event with high robustness, you can talk to a bank and explain to the banker why a particular farmer would be eligible for input credits because that farmer is actually ready to sow, and then you reduce the exposure of the banker, you reduce the interest rate on the loan, you reduce the premium of the insurance that protects that loan, etc. And the ripple effect on the farmer is a very indirect one, but it's critically important because risk aversion as a banker has far dire consequences than risk aversion in a farm.
And to wrap up, Gerald and Masila.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a few examples on the partnership. One is a partnership that we've developed in the Eastern Africa region in the cross-border data collection, where a couple of years back we realized that several of us as various organizations in various borders doing the same thing. And so we got together and we agreed that since you're already in this border, then if you need to expand to the other one, you don't need to, and we started a data sharing process in the MAS group in Eastern Africa as a way of being able to share data between ourselves, the PFP and the FUSNet and that whole group, and that has been working well. But the challenge that we've been facing, particularly from those in the private sector like us, is the question of cost recovery in collecting the data. Because there is a cost to pay a monitor, in the market for the ICT tools and the apps and what have you. And if you don't meet that cost at private sector level, you invest in it, you need to recover it, and that's different from when maybe there is a donor project that is paying that. And so that becomes a complex issue, still a complex issue for us. But we've been now engaging governments because we are trying to tell them that basic data collection is a public good in very many ways, and because once you get the basic data, what you do with it to create another product or something else is different, the monetizing. But the very basic data collection is something that should be considered as a public good that should be funded at the public level, just as a quick suggestion of what we can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause for our presenters?